HMP Brixton, a once revered Victorian fortress of justice nestled in South London, has become something else entirely, a crumbling relic weighed down by bureaucracy, plagued by neglect, and now undergoing a transformation that feels more like an identity crisis than a plan for renewal. In theory, it is a Category C training prison, a place designed to prepare inmates for re-entry into society. In reality, it is a warehouse of human stagnation, where opportunity is the exception and decay is the norm. Behind its high red brick walls and archaic facade, the lived experience is anything but orderly. The conditions are grim and crowded. Most prisoners are doubled up in cells designed for one, with toilets in the corner shielded only by a flimsy curtain. The air is stale with boredom, the hours stretch endlessly, and for many, it's unclear whether this is a place for punishment disguised as rehabilitation, or simply somewhere the system puts people to forget about them. The latest inspection reveals that HMP Brixton is not just underperforming, it's teetering on collapse. At the core of the chaos is a prison operating in limbo. A planned re-roll into a Category B reception facility is underway, but the population still reflects a confused mix of short-term detainees, long stayers, those needing resettlement support, and others still technically meant to be trained. This blurred identity has left staff and inmates trapped in a place that no longer knows what it is, or what it's supposed to be. Overcrowded, under-resourced, and without a coherent purpose, HMP Brixton today is a case study in policy confusion and strategic failure. The consequences of that are everywhere. Violence remains high, and while some areas saw marginal improvements, the tension remains thick. Self-injury and mental health issues are rising, while suicide prevention measures remain unfit for purpose. In fact, staff expressed a dangerous complacency when discussing at-risk individuals, dismissing behavior that should set off alarm bells. The mental health support is outsourced and overwhelmed, and even basic communication between providers and staff is breaking down. When lives are on the line, breakdowns like this don't just delay care, they enable tragedy. Drugs continue to seep through the prison's walls, and the prison's ability to manage the trade is patchy at best. There's been little sustained success in reducing illicit supply. While sniffer dogs and cell searches continue, the underlying causes, idleness, boredom, and desperation, remain untouched. Inmates report feeling safer than before, but this reflects lowered expectations rather than actual progress. It's not safer, it's just that people have given up hope of safety altogether. The fabric of the building is collapsing in places. Cells have been taken out of use due to flooding, and heating issues plagued the prison through winter. In one instance, entire landings lacked heating for months. It speaks volumes when a 21st century prison can't keep the lights on or the water out, and it goes deeper. The infrastructure is decaying because investment hasn't been made, not just in bricks and mortar, but in people, policy and planning. Education is in shambles. While more staff have been recruited, the curriculum is thin, uninspiring, and disconnected from the real needs of prisoners. Attendance remains poor. Tutors struggle to build momentum, and many prisoners remain confused about how to access learning or whether their time will count toward qualifications. It's a tragedy because education is one of the few proven methods for reducing reoffending. But here, it's treated like an afterthought, a checkbox rather than a lifeline. Rehabilitation is meant to be the purpose of imprisonment in a modern society, but in HMP Brixton, it's a ghost. There is no current provision for crucial offending behaviour programs, particularly for individuals convicted of intimate or high-risk crimes. Telephone monitoring backlogs have meant some high-risk offenders are not being properly managed. No one at the prison is even authorised to update the Violent and Intimate Offenders Register, an unbelievable omission that places the public at risk. Release planning, already poor in previous inspections, has virtually collapsed. There is no functioning offender management strategy in place. Resettlement services are under-resourced and misaligned with the prison's shifting role. And for those released directly from Brixton, especially those without a support network, the road outside the gates is often one of immediate homelessness, unemployment, and relapse. It's a revolving door, and the prison knows it. Staffing issues are both a symptom and a cause. There are too few frontline officers, too few experienced middle managers, and a widespread sense that leadership is reactive rather than strategic. Many staff are in temporary positions, unsure of their roles, and unable to implement any long-term change. As the prison's function shifts, there's little clarity about what training they'll need or how they'll deliver a service to a completely different population of prisoners. It's not reform, it's chaos with a new label. The most disturbing part of the Brixton story is that none of this is new. These issues, overcrowding, lack of purposeful activity, mental health failures, safeguarding lapses, have been flagged in inspection after inspection. But change has either been too slow, too shallow, or entirely performative. A few innovative projects have been introduced, such as the option for families to order baked goods for their loved ones, or the idea of community hubs for off-wing association. These are thoughtful ideas, but they are crumbs when the whole prison is starving for real, systemic reform. And then there's the wider question: who is watching? Public attention rarely lingers on a place like HMP Brixton. It's not one of the infamous headline-grabbing maximum security establishments. It's in London, easy to forget, easy to hide in plain sight. But behind those gates, hundreds of men are cycling through a system that fails them at every turn. They're released into a society unprepared to support them, and the system repeats itself. Meanwhile, staff burn out, leadership buckles, and the institution rots. HMP Brixton doesn't need a rebrand, it needs revolution. Until then, it will remain a microcosm of Britain's broken penal strategy, overcrowded, underfunded, poorly led, and morally adrift. And every day it remains like this, lives, both inside and outside those walls, will continue to pay the price. HMP Brixton stands at a volatile crossroads, a prison burdened by its legacy, struggling to function in its present, and now undergoing a major transformation for the future. Despite efforts to move forward, this independent review reveals a prison deeply entangled in systemic dysfunction and overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges it faces. The planned shift to a Category B reception prison, though potentially beneficial in theory, has thrown the institution into a state of limbo. Overcrowding remains chronic, and most prisoners are still locked in squalid, cramped double cells meant for one. Many are idle, lacking meaningful access to education, training, or rehabilitative programs. The fact that 30% of the population are not allocated to any purposeful activity is a damning indictment of the prison's failing structure. Despite some commendable efforts, including creative incentives like family-ordered baked goods and off-wing community centre association, these are mere band-aids on a gaping wound. Violence remains high, drug use persistent, and suicide prevention efforts dangerously insufficient. Leadership is stretched to breaking point, with too few middle managers and an over-reliance on temporary promotions. Staff morale, consistency, and visibility remain low, a key barrier to delivering order or progress. In education, while staffing has improved, the curriculum is narrow and uninspiring. Attendance and punctuality are still poor, and prisoners report confusion over their options. Some initiatives are being developed, such as the reopening of the employment hub, but many interventions, particularly for sex offenders and those with complex needs, are either stalled or non-existent. The prison continues to fail in its public protection responsibilities, with telephone monitoring delayed and no one on site able to update the violent and sexual offenders register. Most damningly, the prison made no meaningful progress on the concern that it was not fulfilling its function as a resettlement prison. With its change in status on the horizon, that function is being abandoned altogether, and those still inside are paying the price in wasted time, wasted potential, and wasted lives. Do you believe it is morally acceptable to keep prisoners in overcrowded, degrading conditions for years with no chance of rehabilitation? If prisons like Brixton are failing to address even the basics, education, safety, Rehabilitation. Who is ultimately responsible for fixing them? With a system this broken, is simply changing a prison's category enough to spark real transformation, or is it just reshuffling the chaos? And finally, in a society that claims to value justice and reform, can we keep ignoring the human cost inside the walls of places like HMP Brixton? Prison custody officer who smuggled drugs into a South London jail has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. Samantha Brown, 22, of Hackney, East London, was convicted of misconduct in a public office and conspiracy to supply drugs at HMP Brixton. The recipient of her criminal activity, prisoner Leon Jackson, 35, received a 5-month jail sentence after being convicted of transmitting sounds and/or images from within the prison. The pair were apprehended following a proactive and intelligence-led investigation, which revealed that Miss Brown was being paid to traffic cannabis into the prison for Mr. Jackson. A search of Mr. Jackson's cell led to the discovery of a mobile phone he had used to communicate with Miss Brown on a daily basis. Analysis of call records indicated hundreds of calls were made between the two. Miss Brown secreted the drugs within her bra and passed them to Mr. Jackson and other inmates when they attended the Crown Court. Detective Inspector Neil Smithson said, "Police and the prison service have identified that the courts are another potential route for drugs to enter prisons. We have worked closely with Serco, who run the court cells, on this case, which should send a message out to court staff that any wrongdoing will lead to arrest and conviction." A former female prison officer has been jailed for 12 months after engaging in secret, romantic and highly intimate relationships with multiple inmates while employed at HMP Brixton. Zanib Khan, 27, admitted to misconduct in public office after it was revealed she had sent and received erotic letters, made late-night calls filled with affectionate language, and maintained inappropriate emotional ties with at least 4 prisoners, 3 of whom were under her supervision. Police suspect the true number of inmates involved in these relationships may be even higher. The scandal surfaced after a mobile phone was discovered in the cell of Jason Graham at Ford Open Prison, who had previously served time at Brixton. Forensic checks on the phone revealed repeated and prolonged contact with Khan, including connections to 2 other convicts, heroin traffickers Timothy Ayegbe and Daryl Smith. Between March and November 2011, Khan spent over 10 hours on the phone with the inmates, calls that went far beyond standard officer-inmate communication. In a recording retrieved by investigators, one 3.5-minute phone conversation between Khan and Ayegbe ended with both parties exchanging "I love yous." Khan's name had been smuggled onto the approved call lists under false identities. Ayegbe had her listed as his mother, and Smith described her as his partner, bypassing prison monitoring protocols. The system was abused to maintain an emotional and increasingly intimate connection between the officer and the prisoners. But it was the contents of the letters that caused the greatest concern to the authorities. Smuggled out of the prison and later found in Khan's bedroom at her family home in Ilford, East London, the letters revealed vivid fantasies and personal affection. One inmate wrote that he could never forget walking through those gates and seeing my beautiful gal. Another spoke of kissing her beautiful lips and body, going on to describe how he wanted to see the petite officers size 2 feet in the air as they made love. The tone was unfiltered, graphic, and revealing of how deep the connection had grown between inmate and officer. Some of the letters displayed handwritten doodles, hearts, and suggestive nicknames. Prisoners would speak longingly of future encounters and fantasized about reuniting with Khan outside the prison walls, clearly blurring the lines between prison discipline and emotional entanglement. Khan's tangled personal life came further into question when it emerged that her father was serving a 4-year sentence for immigration offences, information she failed to disclose when applying for her job with the prison service in January 2009. She joined the service just 12 days after his imprisonment. Even more concerning was her secret relationship with another inmate, Wahid Khalik, who had been convicted of robbery. While his letters were reportedly less graphic, their existence added to the pattern of blurred lines and hidden loyalties in Khan's life. The entire situation only came to light after Graham's mobile phone was seized and linked to Khan's number. A full investigation followed, culminating in a raid on her home and the discovery of the letters. She resigned on the day of her arrest, January 28, 2011. Khan's defense barrister, Anand Baharilal, attempted to downplay the severity of her actions by describing the sexual content as fantasy and flattery, not physical reality. But the prosecution, led by Robin Dupreez, insisted the breach of trust was both deliberate and sustained. Judge David Higgins echoed that assessment, stating in court, "You undertook a knowing and sustained voluntary and gross breach of trust. These were not fleeting moments of poor judgment. This was a calculated misuse of your position over several months." The case raises serious questions about the evolving role of female officers in male prisons. Until the 1980s, female staff were restricted to working in women-only institutions. That changed with gender integration in the prison service, and today, nearly 6,000 women serve as prison officers across England and Wales, about 1 in 4 of the workforce. A significant number now work in male facilities, including high-security wings with some of the most dangerous offenders in the country. Female officers are, by policy, restricted from carrying out body searches on male prisoners and vice versa. Pregnant staff are offered extra protections and may be kept from direct contact with high-risk inmates, but the overall expectation is one of equal footing and equal responsibility. As the editor of the Prison's Handbook, Mark Leach, has noted, around 500 female officers are thought to be stationed in male institutions, and while the vast majority uphold professionalism and boundaries, cases like Khan's underscore how easily those lines can be crossed in high-pressure, emotionally charged environments where loneliness and manipulation can thrive on both sides of the bars. Should prison officers with personal ties to serving inmates or convicted family members be automatically disqualified from certain postings? Does this case reveal systemic gaps in how the prison service screens and supports staff, especially those working in high-risk environments? And how can emotional vulnerability, secrecy, and misconduct be more effectively detected before trust is broken and careers destroyed? Let us know your thoughts below. For nearly 2 decades, Pastor Paul Song was a respected figure inside HMP Brixton, offering hope, spiritual guidance, and redemption to inmates through mainstream Christian teachings. But what unfolded in the later years of his service paints a chilling picture of fear, intimidation, and a prison culture that spiraled dangerously out of control. What Pastor Song describes is not merely internal conflict among faith leaders, but something far more serious: a takeover of the prison's spiritual heart by extremist ideology. He alleges that jihadi sympathizing inmates openly disrupted Christian services, praised terrorists, and intimidated vulnerable prisoners, while authorities turned a blind eye. The warning signs came gradually, then all at once. What was once a peaceful multi-faith chapel, housed in a 19th century wing of the prison, became a battleground. It began with inmates jeering during Bible studies, but soon the atmosphere darkened further. During a discussion on divine grace, 3 inmates stormed into the chapel and began loudly hailing the killers of Fusilier Lee Rigby, the British soldier murdered in broad daylight in Woolwich in 2013. They claimed the brutal act was justified, citing British military actions abroad. When Pastor Song tried to calmly respond, he was shouted down. To do that in a chapel, in a place meant for reflection and peace, was obscene, he recalled, but it didn't end there. On another occasion, he was struck hard from behind as he walked through a wing housing a large population of Muslim inmates. The attackers laughed and hurled racial abuse, calling him a chinky and a crazy Christian. From that day forward, Pastor Song avoided areas of the prison not covered by CCTV. He wasn't alone. Other Christian chaplains began quitting under pressure. Some were shouted at, others simply too afraid to return. Pastor Song stayed, but under constant emotional strain. He says some inmates told him of a protection racket, convert to Islam, or risk being beaten and isolated. Refusal meant being cut off from perks, like access to high-quality halal meals. Others said they were being pressured with threats and psychological coercion. It was gang rule cloaked in religion, Song said. Everything worsened after the appointment of Imam Muhammad Yusuf Ahmed as head chaplain in 2015. Pastor Song claims Ahmed quickly began dismantling the Christian presence inside Brixton. His popular Bible study courses, used in churches across the world, were scrutinized and eventually banned by Ahmed, who called them too radical. The Imam reportedly told Song he wanted to change the Christian domination inside the prison. Song was barred from using the chapel and forced to hold prayer meetings in a holding cell. Even these were eventually shut down. He was physically intimidating, Song said. He would loom over me and say I should just leave. But I kept thinking, why should I give in to intimidation? Then came the shock. In August 2017, after 19 years of service, Pastor Song was suddenly banned from Brixton. The official reason? Allegations, strongly denied by Song, that he called a prisoner a terrorist and threatened the Imam. No formal interview, no opportunity to defend himself. Just a letter stating his removal was permanent and with immediate effect. It was, as Song described, a surreal betrayal. For years he'd helped turn around the lives of hardened criminals, some who had committed horrendous acts of violence. His ability to connect with them came, he believes, from his time as a detective in South Korea before emigrating to the UK. Through the Alpha and Christianity Explored courses, he helped inmates discover purpose, peace, and often faith. Nigel Williams, a former inmate, said hundreds of ex-prisoners held Pastor Song in the highest regard. The prisoners were devastated by his removal, he wrote. Jeremy Conlon, another former inmate, stated that the largest gang in the prison was the extremist Muslim group. They ruled by threat of violence, he wrote. The Muslims offered protection to converts. The rest lived in fear. Still, it was Song who was branded the extremist. Even more disturbing was the prison's apparent willingness to accept the accusations without scrutiny. No hearings, no evidence review, just silence. But Song refused to go quietly. With the support of the Christian Legal Centre, he launched legal action. An independent investigation, led by Governor Sarah Pennington of HMP Elmley, eventually cleared him. The review found that the prison's internal probe was limited and had not followed basic due process. He was reinstated in 2018. Imam Ahmed, the man Song believes orchestrated his removal, is no stranger to controversy. A former General Secretary of the Islamic Party of Britain, an organisation that reportedly advocated the death penalty for homosexuality and promoted an Islamic Britain, Ahmed had publicly denounced Barbie dolls as pornographic and a sign of the Day of Judgment. He has also been linked to Al-Hikmah Media, a radical platform that has hosted preachers who allegedly supported violent punishments for women and apostates. Ahmed was later suspended from his role at Brixton for reasons unrelated to Song's case. The prison has since advertised for a new head chaplain. The Ministry of Justice officially denied all of Song's claims about extremist behaviour within Brixton. But insiders, former inmates, and fellow volunteers paint a different picture. One of a jail where the balance of power shifted dangerously and where ideology was enforced by fear. Pastor Song's case raises serious questions. How did a man with nearly 20 years of unblemished service end up punished while extremist voices operated openly? Why were Christian services curtailed under vague claims of radical content while inmates openly praised the killers of a British soldier? And what safeguards exist to protect religious volunteers of any faith when ideology and power collide behind prison walls? Today, Pastor Song is back. He plans to restart his classes, though cautiously, and remains hopeful that prisons can once again become places of genuine rehabilitation, not ideological control. This is not about Islam versus Christianity, he said. It's about intimidation versus freedom. I still believe in forgiveness, but that doesn't mean staying silent when truth is under attack.